On May 15th, 2025, after spending 28 years on death row, Glen Edward Rogers was executed by lethal injection in Florida. His crimes were as brutal as they were senseless, leaving a trail of devastation. In this video, we'll uncover what happened, his last meal, and his last words. Glen Rogers had many names. To some, he was the Casanova Killer. To others, the cross-country killer. He wasn't just another name on death row. He once claimed to have committed more than 70 murders. But long before courtrooms and mugshots, Glen was just a kid from Hamilton, Ohio. And that's where the story began. Born on July 15, 1962, Glen was one of 7 siblings, raised in a home that could barely contain the chaos. His father worked at a paper mill, and his red-haired mother ruled the house with a heavy hand. Glen was smart in his own way, but never seemed to settle. He was expelled from school by 16, and at 17, he was already married to a 14-year-old girl he got pregnant. They had 2 kids together, but the marriage didn't last. His wife accused him of abuse and filed for divorce. From there, things got worse. Glen drifted. He drank, he fought, and he stole. By the early 90s, he had already developed a reputation as a manipulator, charming to strangers, but dangerous to anyone who got too close. In 1993, he drifted back into town, low on money and out of options. But his mother wouldn't take him in. Instead, Mark Peters did, a 71-year-old Air Force veteran, retired electrician, and family friend. Mark offered Glen a room and a second chance. He trusted him, but that cost him his life. Not long after Glen moved in, Mark disappeared. At first, there wasn't much to go on. His car was gone, his guns, his coin collection, also gone. And so was Glen. Police spent months trying to piece together what happened, but came up empty. Then, in January 1994, a tip came from inside Glen's own family. His brother pointed detectives to an old hunting cabin across the state line in Kentucky. Inside, they found a chair buried under furniture, and tied to it were the decaying remains of Mark Peters. The scene told its own story. Mark hadn't left. He'd been bound, hidden, and left to rot by the man he once trusted enough to share his home with. But Glen wasn't done, and that was just the beginning of his killing spree. On the night of September 28, 1995, in Venice, California, Glen crossed paths with Sandra Gallagher at a bar. She was 33, a mother of 3, lucky, and ready to celebrate a $1,250 lottery win. But from across the room, Glen wasn't celebrating, he was watching her. Glen always watched, not for beauty, but for weakness. He studied body language, searching for cracks. A woman who held herself with confidence, he'd pass. But someone with softer shoulders, a tired smile, maybe a little too trusting, that's who he was waiting for. And Sandra didn't see it coming. By the time she stepped onto the dance floor, Glen had already made his choice. Sandra Gallagher never made it home that night. Her charred remains were found in her own car, abandoned and set on fire. Glen Rogers had killed her, taken her money, and left her life in ashes. But Sandra wasn't his only victim. Glen moved quickly from state to state, leaving behind a trail of death. Linda Price in Jackson, Mississippi, Tina Marie Cribbs in Tampa, Florida, and Andy Sutton in Louisiana, all found dead after crossing paths with Rogers. His pattern was chillingly consistent: charm, manipulate, and then kill. Linda Price in Jackson. Linda Price met Glen Rogers in a bar, charmed by his smooth talk and promises. She invited him to stay at her place for a few days. But when her family couldn't reach her, they knew something was wrong. Police discovered Linda's lifeless body in her apartment, stabbed multiple times, with signs of a violent struggle. Glen was already gone, leaving behind a bloody scene and a missing car. In Tampa, Florida, Tina Marie Cribbs also fell for his deceptive charm. Glen convinced her to give him a ride from the bar where they met. Hours later, Tina's body was discovered in a motel bathroom. She had been stabbed twice in the chest. The motel clerk remembered Glen leaving alone, carrying Tina's car keys, which later linked him to the crime. In Louisiana, Andy Sutton wasn't as easily convinced. He was a tough guy, but Glen knew how to manipulate. After spending time with Andy, Glen struck while his guard was down. Andy's body was found in his own home, beaten and strangled. Glen had taken his truck and fled the state. Glen's downfall came not from his cunning, but from his arrogance. He taunted the police, even calling his family to brag about his exploits. When the FBI issued a warrant for his arrest, he remained one step ahead, but not for long. In November 1995, after a nationwide manhunt, police caught Glen Rogers in Kentucky. He was driving a stolen car and tried to outrun the officers, but a high-speed chase ended with his capture. In his car, police found bloodstains, personal items belonging to his victims, and the haunting sense that they had finally caught a predator. The trial was swift and unforgiving. The evidence was overwhelming: DNA, witness testimonies, and Glen's own boastful admissions. In 1997, he was sentenced to death for the murder of Tina Marie Cribbs, with additional convictions for the killings of Sandra Gallagher and other victims. Glen spent 28 years on death row at Florida State Prison, where he maintained his innocence regarding some murders while confessing to others. He often rambled about his life and crimes, leaving detectives wondering how many deaths he was truly responsible for. Some believed his claim of 70 victims, while others thought he was exaggerating. On May 15, 2025, Glen Edward Rogers faced his final moments. His last meal was simple: fried chicken, mashed potatoes with gravy, and a slice of apple pie. As the execution chamber filled, he was asked for his final words. Glen looked at the witnesses, family members of the victims, guards, and officials. He took a breath and simply said, "I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I hope you find peace." As the lethal injection took effect, Glen's eyes closed and his breathing slowed. Moments later, he was pronounced dead. The legacy of Glen Rogers remains one of darkness and brutality, a chilling reminder of how a man can hide evil behind a charming smile. To those he hurt, his death may not bring closure, but it ends the chapter of the Casanova Killer. If you found this story gripping, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more intense true crime stories. Your support helps us uncover more chilling tales. Don't miss out.